This is Robbie McKenzie, Youth Ministry 6.3 from Nehemiah 6, verse 3, which says, "I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down." I have with me, as I say, the one and only David Fraze from Richland Hills Church of Christ, the Hills Church of Christ, Director of Student Ministries there, and overall youth ministry guru. And
thank you. Wow.
Just want to welcome you, and if you could just kind of give us some background. What do you do there at Richland Hills? What have you done? I believe you taught at, I want to say Lubbock, but I'm not sure. I think it was Lubbock. But if you just kind of want to give me some background, that would be cool, man.
Awesome. I've been doing youth ministry paid for like 21 years now. Started in 1989 as a student ministry in Lubbock, Texas, Green Lawn Church of Christ. And then went full-time in 91. I'm from the Metroplex, but moved to Lubbock to go to school, and I stayed there for 20 years. Loved it. Stayed at the same church for 13 years, and then I went to Lubbock Christian, where I was a professor of student ministries there for 7 years. Felt the call to go back into full-time student ministry and started that up in 2007 here at the Hills Church. And right now I'll look over junior high all the way through college age, have a great staff. We have 3 campuses of youth ministry right now, student ministry going on, and love it.
That's awesome. How many people are on staff there that you kind of oversee?
Let's see, we have 2, 3, 4, 6 full-time, 2 being administrators. Then we have a part-time worship guy that works with us. And we'll have one intern per minister, so 3 of those will be coming in. And we're starting right now a resident program where we'll take recent graduates for 2 years, and we'll work with them and then launch them into their own ministry. So we're pretty excited about that.
Awesome. I'm interviewing David about preparing yourself for youth ministry. He's prepared a lot of youth ministers and helped in preparing them for student ministry. And so, David, just the first question, why do you think so many people, and this is just I didn't really get any feedback, but this is just my perception and discussion with college students in general, why do you think so many people want to be youth ministers versus, let's say, preachers or some other vocational ministry? Why do you perceive that, or at least in your experience?
I think there's a lot of reasons. Let me give you a couple of them. One, I think there's kind of a stigma to the idea of preacher. I had a lot of students who really were good preachers, and they think, that they would love to preach. They just don't want to be called that. I think it's kind of a cultural deal. I think, I'm going to give you some backstory about systemic abandonment. I think a lot of our young people see the pulpit as the place that hands down the rules, and maybe they came from a situation where they didn't have a lot of relationship with their pulpit preacher. So it had naturally had a stigma towards that role. And I don't want to throw all preachers under the bus. I've worked with some great ones that would load up and go on mission trips with us. And so I've had some students that actually would use the word preacher. But their idea of it was different because their preacher role was different in their lives. So some of it is just the stigma attached to it. I also think a lot of students, they want to do ministry, and they've been touched by youth ministry in particular. They've had a youth minister that has walked alongside them and kind of said, "Hey, I think you can do this." And so there really is a calling towards that. So I mean, that's 2 of the reasons. I think it would take us a long time to kind of delve into the idea of really in all of our Christian schools within Churches of Christ. And I think I can say this outside of our fellowship. There's not as many preacher majors. There's a lot of people doing ministry, a lot of people doing vocational ministry, a lot of individuals that want to do some sort of missions work, but they just don't want the title of preacher. But it doesn't mean they're not going to preach, which is so funny.
Yep, absolutely. Let's get into some more specific questions about youth ministry itself. Just how does one go about, and this too, you can't really just answer it quickly or succinctly, but how does one go about preparing himself or herself for youth ministry or student ministry?
Dude, I give you 3 quick things. One, I believe that if anybody's going to go into the ministry, they need to prepare themselves in the Word. This is going to be kind of unpopular with some youth ministry people, but I do think that students should learn the Greek language or Hebrew, that they should get involved in the skills that will enable them to dig deep into the Word. Because a lot of us have that personality that a student will hear us, but if we don't have anything to say, it'll become an exchange of ignorance. Or, I mean, how many times can we tell a kid, don't live life this way, but glorify Jesus?
Right.
Be good friends, know the Bible. That is the Word, the living Word of God. So I'm going to say, if you're going to do this full time, or even if you think you're going to go and minor in some kind of youth ministry, or if you're just saying, I want to work with teenagers, man, get involved in the study of God's Word, because that's foundational. The second thing, there's so many great programs out there in any of our, universities within Churches of Christ and outside Churches of Christ. You find someone who has done youth ministry who's teaching it. I'm kind of, again, this is going out to the World Wide Web here, but I do not like guys that teach ministry that have very little experience.
Absolutely.
I think you need to nestle up to someone who is teaching as a professor, but has been in the trenches, and I would even say even working still actively with the youth ministry, so that they could take theory and put it into practice. So that's the second thing. The third thing, do internships, whether it is part of your practicum, whether you go to a local church, wherever you're going to university, and you volunteer and just kind of, learn how to do small group, learn how to plan for a trip, learn how to clean up a van from junior high kids being on. You got to have hands-on training. And those three things really will prepare you for a future of student ministry. Somebody hired me when I was 19. It's horrifying thinking of this. Yeah, 21 passenger van and said, have fun, take the kids to a summer youth series.
Oh, wow.
It's so unsafe thinking about that. But they trusted me, and I didn't get paid very much. I wasn't making a grade, but as soon as I was available, I would put myself out there as an intern so I could get that experience. So it's good stuff.
That's awesome. I was in a conversation with a youth minister about 3 or 4 years ago, and he was just having a rough time. I mean, things were going bad, and he just did not like what he was doing, and so he's asking me, how do I get better at being a youth minister? How do I develop my skills? And I hated to say this, David, but and you've come across this as well. I just said, bro, I think, man, I really think you don't need to be a youth minister. Just based on your skills, based on what you want to do in life, you really don't need to be a youth minister. And that was not something he wanted to hear, but I felt discerned that something he needed to hear. So let me ask you, how do you know you're not ready for youth ministry, or you're just not cut out to be a youth minister, or youth ministry is just not your thing? How do you know?
Well, I love what you just said, because I think we need to be more honest with individuals. I think within the body of Christ that we make decisions as a community. I mean, the Bible's very clear. Notice me using that Bible training. Very that the community can actually help us discern gifts. If we believe, as 1 Corinthians 12 says, that everybody has a place in the body, then the body can help us discern our place. And I think it's people like you, Robbie, who can work with an intern and say, this isn't going to work, let's try something else. But it was hard as a professor to have people come in and they want to do student ministry, and you're like, it's not working out. If you're a student and you constantly get bad reviews from your internships, or if people just aren't hiring you, and it's not because you necessarily have to be extroverted, because I know a lot of introverted youth ministers. It's not that you have to have a certain athletic, type skill, but if you're not getting hired anywhere, there may be a reason for that. And I would seek godly men and women who could say, this is what we see in your life. I know you want to do this, but let's try something different. I've had students that wanted to do the whole church thing, that it wasn't going to work out. Because parents, there's no way they would look at him and say, I'm not putting a kid on a van with you. The trust wasn't there. They couldn't communicate with the teenagers very well. They had that awkward feeling. but we would remove them from the church and stick them like in a children's home situation where they would be the activity director with like 12 kids, and they came alive. So sometimes it's up to us as older men and women to just say, hey, let's rethink your vision. You wanted to be with students, that's fine, but could we do it in another way? And so it's really, the community's good for that.
Absolutely. And speaking of community, say we are youth ministers and we have been doing it for a while. What does training look like, even before youth ministry, during youth ministry? What does youth ministry training look like? Pre getting hired, I would say that theological study, mentoring by doing those internships. I would say a lot of conversations like this where, guys who are interested in ministry, they tune into a channel like you're providing here and saying, okay, what are these guys saying who've been in the trenches for a while? Conferences, like our conference, the National Conference on Youth Ministry, we invite college students to come and be a part of it. And there's not a better experience than to sit in a room with all of these people who've been doing this for a while and sitting at a table with them and saying, hey, can I visit with you and seek advice? And please don't be a creeper. There's guys that are like, hey, can I sit with you every time we turn around? It's not, that may not get you hired. But to want to spend time with other people, I think like yourself, myself, a lot of other guys, we love to sit down with guys who are interested in student ministry and ask them the hard questions. So that's the pre. For myself, I've been doing this for a while. I need a little encouragement to dig deeper. So I got advanced degrees. I got a master's, then I went to Abilene Christian for a year and got an MDiv equivalency and enjoyed that time. And then I went to Fuller and got my doctorate. I need sometimes to be made to study, and so that was helpful if you're in a situation where you can do that. Sometimes training within our staff, there's maybe a staff member that says, hey, I read this book, and so we'll buy copies of the books for everyone and challenge each other to read it, and our staff meetings bring up significant things that we've been reading. And, of course, going to conferences. Once you've been in ministry for a while, sometimes guys my age are like, well, I don't need to go because I've learned everything. I think that kind of attitude is so, arrogant, to be honest with you. Absolutely. There's constantly things that I'm learning and being challenged with. And when we fail to think we can learn something from somebody else, I think it's kind of the beginning of the end for us, to be honest with you, because youth culture is always changing. We need to read. We need to be involved in conversations. And we need to nestle up to people that will help us become better. One more thing that helps me personally is I ask my staff, I ask other people who know me, I ask my preacher when I preach. I'm like, okay, you heard me speak, or how was my leadership? Do you see anything in my life that I can do better, even as a husband, as a father? I want that kind of accountability so that I can remain moldable and get better. That's cool. Just a couple more questions. First, what are some do's and don'ts? And both of these questions are tied to your first few moments of youth ministry. What are some do's and don'ts in your first 2 years of youth ministry?
I think one of the biggest do's is get to know your congregation. Hopefully you've done this before you got hired.
Absolutely.
There's so much resource out there to know what questions to ask. It's hard, though, when you first get out of college because you're so excited that somebody's interested in you. Like, I have a job, I can feed my family. I'm so excited. But really get to know the people. There are those whose shoulders you stand on. You are not the gift of youth ministry. We're all expendable. It's God's kingdom, not yours. So when we step into the ministry, we need to get to know the people and the leadership and be respectful of that. And it doesn't matter if you're brand new or been doing youth ministry for a number of years. You need to be respectful for what's already there and listen deeply. Even here, after starting, doing youth ministry for a while, the first thing we did was we listened and we gathered resources and tried to identify those resources rather. So when we looked at the needs, by listening, we looked at the resources, and then we started developing a program. I think when you just run in and say, here's my program, here's what I do, Again, it's kind of an arrogant thing to say, because like any missionary, and we are cultural missionaries, you go into a church and they have their own culture and their own speak, and you got to get to know that before you just come in and start doing, crazy programs. Also, when you listen and you start assessing the needs and you start developing your own program, you can kill sacred cows that need to be killed. I always say it's better to kill a fattened calf that's sacred instead of a skinny calf. So, be sure to know your sacred cow before you slaughter it. There's some things that need to change, but if you just walk in day one and say, this is not what I do, we're going to a whole separate set of camps, and that's, we're mission trips. You've been doing it wrong. Let me show you how to do it right. You probably won't last long there. So listen, assess those needs, develop your resource list, and then develop a program from there. Another thing, too, if I don't say the word intergenerational, I'm pretty much going to get fired. I'm a really big believer in that adults need to be involved intentionally in the life of kids. So you need to spend a lot of time getting to know the families, the adults that are involved in the student ministry. It's different what that'll look like if you're in a small church or a large church, but you somehow have to get those adults engaged in believing in the vision that you want the student ministry to look like. So pretty simple right there. Kids' names, parents' names, look them in the eye and say, hello, I'm Dave, what's your name? Go into their school events, not to sacrifice your own family time, but to be involved in their world will help you get a good start in your first couple of years.
That's great. Last question, just from, and youth ministry, as you've seen it, you've been in it so long, it changes.
That makes you so old.
I know, I hate that, but I mean, it's you've been in it for such a while now. You know that it can change, not only in years, but sometimes youth ministry changes between months. I mean, it's always in cycles, and especially the idea of new graduates and then new 7th graders or 6th graders and all that. So what is, based on your, culturally or however you want to answer the question, what is, as you see it, the future of youth ministry?
I think, and I'll go back to that intergenerational word, the thing that we're finding out, that students who have long-term connection to Jesus Christ are those who have a long-term connection to the adult body of believers, and at least, Chap says 5, Chap Clark, 5 adults. Other people will say different numbers, but the point is there's significant adults that know a kid's name and have poured life into them, even outside their moms and dads. So back to that adult connection, I think we're going to have to take more seriously that our job is not just to get kids all hyped up and introduce them to Jesus, but to also give them some transition points into the adult body of believers. One of the things we're doing here, we call it our 7+1, that we're asking our volunteers when a student gets into 6th grade, and that's when we start youth ministry here, that they will stay with them through their 7 years, small group leaders, retreat sponsors, go on mission trip camps, do whatever they can, but try to remain actively engaged with that class for 7 years +1. And what we mean by the +1 is when they go to college, when they go into the workforce or the military, that you remain connected, cards, letters, acknowledge when they come home to visit the church family, that there is a systemic connection between their 6th grade year to their launching into the adult world. So, I mean, that's I think what we're all going to have to do is find intentional ways to get the adult body of believers and the young people together in some meaningful conversation. And that will change the way that we do things. I still love the big youth events. I love going and, all the hype of the worship and stuff. I don't think that's necessarily going to go away. But one of the things that really for the last few years, I don't leave them on that emotional high, but I try to bring them back down to say, okay, here's where this is really going to impact you in your daily life when you wake up next week, after the mission trip, after the camp, after the retreat. And I try to catch them better than I ever have, so that it's not just a feeling, it's not just something that could be dismissed as, well, that's just a camp high, but I try to apply all of those experiences they have into a real life setting for them.
That's awesome. This is been another episode of Youth Ministry 6.3. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Hang on a little bit. Learned so much. And this is Dave Fraze. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robbie.